And welcome to Pora and to Tim. Thanks, it's good to see you guys. Thanks very much for turning up. So just before we kick off, I'm just going to go through the quick bios of our designated speakers. And I'm going to do them in reverse order of speaking. First of all, my great friend, Dr. Saula Johansson-Fua. This is what Saula says about herself. She says, I'm Tongan, I live in Tonga with my family, and I'm blessed to be part of a large clan that lives in Tonga and throughout the Tongan diaspora. So Saula belongs to the Free Church of Tonga, where she's a Sunday school teacher. She's the chair of the Māori Tonga Trust, which is an NGO that works with rural communities, supporting sustainable livelihoods. She's been with the University of South Pacific for 17 years, and she's currently the director of the Institute of Education of the University of South Pacific, which is based in Atele in Tonga, just out of Nuku'alofa. Dr. Jani Wilson is from Paro on the outskirts of Whakatane and connects predominantly to Ngāti Awa and Ngāpuhi and the Matatua tribes. She studied vocals at the Excel of Performing Arts and then moved to film, television and media and Māori studies at UOA through an MA Hons in film and TV and then a PhD. Jani was the inaugural Māori postdoctoral fellow in art and design in 2015 at AUT, and until recently was the program leader in Māori media at Te Ara Potama, the Faculty of Māori and Indigenous Development at AUT. She's currently Senior Lecturer and Research Coordinator in Critical Kaupapa Māori Screen Arts at Te Rewa or Puanga at Massey University in Wellington. Her research is primary in Māori feature film studies, screen kapahaka, and Māori research, pedagogies, and academic excellence. And finally, Dr. Adreanne Ormond is Indigenous Māori from the nation of Rongamai Wahine, where she was raised on ancestral land within her Māori community. She's currently with the Faculty of Education at VUW, where she's a senior lecturer. In this role, she teaches supervisors and researchers across the politics of indigeneity, exploring Māori knowledge systems, issues of culture and race, and methodologies of decolonisation and transformation. This scholarly activity is undertaken by her with the aim to support and enhance the political, economic, and social autonomy of Māori. So at this point, we'll hand over to Adreanne as our speaker. And thank you, Adreanne, for offering us your paper for discussion.
Kia ora. Ko tāki tina waka, ko rō mai wahine te iwi, ko kaiki te marae, ko waipuna te maunga, ko wainui te awa, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. Thank you, Martin, for that lovely welcome. It's funny when you hear that, you always sound better on when you're introduced than you actually feel. So I come to this space with humbleness, shall we say, aware that there's many people working on their ancestral homelands, as well as contributing to them. So the paper that we wrote, my sister and I, that's my sister Joanna, it comes out of a time where there was disruption on our ancestral homeland, which is Mahia Peninsula, and the iwi is Rōmai Wahine. And so it's a peninsula, it's beautiful, and people were trying to build a subdivision. And we campaigned against the subdivision and managed to stop it. But out of the discussions that we had in terms of our resistance to this modern development on our traditional homeland, arose these conversations that we wanted to capture. And this is where the paper comes from, talking to our community and trying to capture some of the ways that they talked about our homeland. Now, for those of you who have read the paper, you'll see the points in it. I want to pull out some of the main points today that kind of underlie the paper, as well as hold my interest in the type of work that I like to try and do. First of all, being Rōmai Wahine and being raised on my ancestral homeland and still living there when I'm not living in Wellington, for me, home, or the notion of home and ancestral homeland, means everything. As a Māori academic, I cross that bridge between the institution and the community as part of my work. I move between the institution and the community as part of my academic community identity. And I see this as part of my role. In this paper, I have crossed that bridge through raising the topic of an ancestral homeland. I've explored, along with my sister Joanna, I've explored the notion of what is an ancestral homeland. By no means have I covered all the options on it, but I've just brought this simple contribution in terms of asking what is an ancestral homeland to the table to be discussed. We've questioned, what does an ancestral homeland mean? What does it mean to us as a community? What does it mean to us as an Omai Wahine? What does it mean to me as a researcher, as an academic? What does it mean to those of us who live on that homeland? How has that homeland shaped us? When I say shaped, what are the ways that its energy, its vibrancy, its being, its intelligence penetrates us so that we become the type of beings that we are? We've also explored, how does the notion of an ancestral homeland shape our practices? Also, how does it shape the type of knowledge that we generate? That we generate as academics, as well as that we generate as an Omai Wahine living on this place. How does this being that I call the ancestral homeland, and go on to name as a land, sea, skyscape in another paper, how does that make us us? And what composes that ancestral homeland? What are the things that make it that living ecology? So these are some of the things that underlie this paper. We go and we visit with the community, we collect some of their thoughts, and we bring them together to represent some of the relationality, some of the whakapapa, some of the epistemologies, some of the ontologies that they understand in terms of this particular ancestral homeland. That's all I have to say on the paper. I'm going to give the time on to the respondents now and wait to hear the rich discussion from the rest of you.
Kia ora, and thank you, Adrianne, for kicking things off. I really enjoyed reading the paper. It's the second time I've read it, and as someone who's been to Mahia, it's interesting to just try and imagine the conversations that were taking place in that beautiful place. Anyway, we'll hand over to Johnny. Johnny, it's your opportunity to respond. Thank you, and thank you for giving us your time and coming to this space.
Kia ora wā atu ki a koutou, e te whānau o te rorohiko, ko wai au ki te taha o tōku karaua he uriau o te rohe o te waka o mā tātua, ki te taha o tōku kuia he uriau no te whare tapu o Ngāpuhi me te kōpū āhene āmaru ko mā tātua te waka. Kia ora everybody, I was just chatting, I just sent a chat to Adreanne saying that I actually threw out my response last night, and I decided to do something a little bit different. The reason being is because I have recently moved to Wellington, and before that was living for years in Auckland, but I'm from a really small place, like Adreanne, from a really small place on the outskirts of Whakatane called Pārua. And I found myself feeling very, very emotional when I read this, because I know what it's like to drive home and to, you know, the relief that you feel when you smell the sea breeze and when you see your maunga, and when you, when I see Motohora and when I see Putauaki, I know I'm home. So I decided that I would write a little waiata for you, Adreanne. And it's called Haere Mai. And it's about, you know, the land calling to us and us joining with our tipuna and us returning to our land and to our homeland. When we close our eyes, that's where our kāinga, our homeland is. It's hidden when we close our eyes. It's our whenua ki te whenua, so our land, our placenta in the land. We are one with the land. It's the chiefly land, and it's that place of tranquility. So here is my response. Haere mai, hoki mai, karana te whenua ki ahau. Auraki mai, ito tipuna, hoki mai ano, ki te manga. Whakahona hona e, whakaururua, mana koia ki te iwi. Ka tira oku whatu, kei kona kāinga i raro e huna whenua ki te whenua, whenua ngā tira, tōna te marino, Putanoa, wakainga, Putanoa, wakainga, Nei rā te mihi aroha ki a koe, Adreanne. Tēnā koe.
Ah, kia ora, Chani. What a fantastic response to not only sing a waiata, but to write the waiata for the occasion. We're really honoured by that, and thank you. So from Te Whanganui Atara and Whakatane, we're going over to the Kingdom of Tonga and over to Dr. Sailor. It's the platform's yours, Sailor.
Malo Martin, ko koreke o whātolo pa moe whenua o Aotearoa. Ka pehe whātolo ki he ongo whewhine ko wahe mai he pongpong koe ni kai ata moa. Ke kumia wheitu ke utu watu ai he pongpong koe ni. Like to recognize the space that we're in and the spirit of Māoridom and the land of Aotearoa. And I seek a place to stand this morning on where do I come in, where do I stand, and how do I respond to such a beautiful gift. The only place I could stand from is from the Polynesian ancestral homeland. So forgive me if any of what I comment or say falls short of any expectations this morning. As we're united by the same ocean, we're also divided by the many other issues that we all face in our own homelands. First of all, to appreciate the paper that was presented and the knowledge that was shared. I read the paper and felt moved in many levels. It took me back to my own childhood. And then there are parts of the paper that I just don't understand because of my own history and past. But the words that are in the paper resonate so much with also our own Polynesian languages that it's hard to ignore the spirit behind it and the philosophies behind it. So I'm very grateful, and I say thank you to the authors and thank you for sharing that knowledge through this way. When I read the paper, I think back to one particular country in the Pacific that we serve through USB, and that is Tuvalu. In my last trip to Tuvalu, I had a conversation with one of my friends, and she talked about her family leaving the island of Nafuti because of sea level rising. So it got me worried. I mean, of course, many others of us who live in the Pacific are very concerned with climate change and sea level rising, which is a reality for us and our children. So the option of relocation and leaving our ancestral home in this century is very real. So my question is around how do we maintain that connection to the whenua, to the whanua, that is physical, spiritual, cultural. How do we maintain that connection to the whenua? And how do you maintain the connection to the iwi when you're outside of the homeland? And how do you recreate, if you can recreate, the connections to the community when you're no longer part of the homeland, when you're no longer there? How do you recreate it? Is it possible to recreate the spiritual connection, the mana that is so closely tied to the land? How do you recreate, and to what degree do you still maintain the authenticity of that original and connection to the land? Because you can't move the land. You can't move Funafuti to Melbourne. You move the people, but not the land that is connected to the ancestors. And those of us that our placentas were buried in that space. So my question is a question about looking forward, looking ahead. For most of us in these Pacific Islands, the reality of relocation is there for this generation and my children. Where will they go? And how do we recreate the connection to the ancestral land? Malo apito fa mafana apito, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Malo Pito, Sola, thank you. Thank you so much for your response there. At this point, I'll just hand back to Adreanne and give her the opportunity to follow up on anything that's been said or indeed sung. And then we'll open it up to the floor to see what else people would like to story in relation to the discussion. Adreanne.
Kia ora, Martin. Just thinking and trying not to cry, thanks to Jani. And Sayola, just beautiful what you said, just so touching. And oh gosh. So I want to say something about the questions that you raised, Sayola. I think this is some of the profound tensions that we are sitting with. And I think it questions and invokes the questioning of how do we understand our relationality to that whenua? Is it a physical presence, or is it more? In the way that I understand it, and the way that I would write it in that paper is an ancestral homeland and your relationality to it, which I would understand as whakapapa. My relationality to the ancestral homeland is spiritual. It's, you know, it's physical, it's temporal, it's also spiritual. And so it's going to transcend the Western ways of understanding my connection to a homeland. So the questions that you've posed about the future in the Anthropocene and the conditions that we are in and having to move from those ancestral homelands, I think that is where this type of development of research question or ontology is sitting, questioning that divide between where we're at and what the future is, and questioning how the Western world has understood an ancestral homeland and our relationality to it. I just thought what you said was beautiful. It was just so emotionally evocative as well as intellectually evocative. Jani, I just don't know what to say to you. You totally exceeded what I expected in terms of a response, but you touched on something that, I mean, you're singing outstanding, but you also did something else that I didn't do when I introduced the paper. I mean, Sayola did it too. Like, you both spoke to the ancestral homeland as, or whenua, as a being that you have engaged with and that knows you and you know. And I didn't do that when I introduced the paper. And so when you both did that, I thought, yes, of course. You know, I grew up on home knowing just what Jani said, like, you know, I know the ocean, I know the hills, I know the land. And when something happens to that ancestral ecology or that being, I'm hurt. When the ancestral homeland is well, I'm well. You know, like when it flourishes, I flourish. And when it is despised and undermined and undervalued and seen as a resource, I ache. And I think this is some of the tensions that we as Indigenous scholars sit around, you know, whether we live on that homeland or are raised on it, or whether we are raised off it. I think this is some of our responsibility and that bridge that we cross between being in the institution and being in the community. And for me personally, part of my, part of what compels me as a Māori academic is to maintain that homeland and that community that lives on it in a way that they wish to be, which is the heart, that's at the heart of what we call kaupapa Māori, the right to be healthy and flourish in the different ways that we wish to be, which is no easy task, as Sayola has pointed out. We're up against great challenge to do that. I'm going to stop there because I think I've talked enough, Martin. I just ending, I just want to thank both Sayola and Jani. It's just been so humbling to hear your words and your voice. I'm very humbled and honoured by what you've contributed and what you've offered me in terms of the paper.
Kei te pai. Whāpene.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the discussion so far. I'm just reflecting on what has been said, and I have a few words to share with you all. Where do I stand? The disruption, the subdivision of my ancestral land. My homeland means everything to me. It is a reflection of me, of my people. I return home with relief to the smell, to the memories of reconnecting. My placenta, ki te whenua, haere mai, hoki mai, ki tō maunga, ki tō whenua. Ko tēnei te honona, ko tēnei taku whakapapa. I am the land is me. Where do I stand? Kia ora.
Kia ora. Okay, so the floor is open for people who would like to join in.
Thank you, Martin. Can I share my current thoughts based on the
Kōrero mai.
meeting? But this is, I guess, this is one of the advantages of listening to people who sort of really understand and try and grapple with some of the challenges that we're facing as people of Moana Nui Akiwa. The questions that Seula raises continues to, confront all of us, even those of us who are no longer in Tonga, Samoa or Niue, but have now, are now physically present in Aotearoa. So my whenua, my placenta is in Niue, Alofi Niue. I'm physically here with my wife and son and mother-in-law. My parents and majority of my siblings are in Australia, Perth, Sydney. To kind of think about the future and how we define ancestry. And Pine, you did a beautiful sort of description earlier that we carry, as people carry notions of land and the embodiment of whenua and all these ideas, and it sits around relationality. Having worked with Seula, these are some of the real profound things that you really understand when you're physically on whenua. Like in Tonga, in Fiji, Republic of the Marshall Islands, you get to feel those things. And the further you move away from there, you experience it differently. It's not a removal, complete removal, but you embody those learnings differently. And I'm just wondering, like what you've all done has sort of made me think about ancestry as this dynamic concept. And then if my son, I mean, even my nephews and nieces, and if we think of ancestry as, grandparents and all those things, and they're now living in Australia. So how is ancestry going to, what is it going to look like from there. At this point in time, I understand it not completely for what it is here at this point in time. And Tongans used the concept of tāwā. I won't go into that, we'll leave that to the profound people, but it's time and space is real critical for me in deciphering ancestry and even responsibility. But thank you for the, I guess, affirmation that these things are continuous and that we need to navigate it all the time. And yeah, it's not a simple thing. I just thought I'd share that, and I really appreciate the kōrero from Adreanne and Se Ula and Jani and Pine. Mahalo.
Mara pito, Dave. Adrian, one of the things that interested me in your paper, and it relates to everything that's been said, I think, but in a kind of a microcosm kind of way, is that you talked about when you were having conversation with some of the iwi about certain things, particularly about events that had happened or wahitapu or sacred land, they actually wanted to go and be in that place, not just on the whenua in general, but actually at that specific place. I wondered if you could comment on your thinking about that.
Thanks, Martin. I'm beginning to think on other papers I've kind of written around this. So I think, yeah, okay, let me just explore that a little bit. I think this touches on that notion of embodied knowledge. I mean, they don't understand it like that. And it's really strange writing on this stuff because in some ways I feel, you know, you get really conflicted when you're writing on this stuff because you feel a deep responsibility to represent it in the way that it is known in the place that it comes from. You know, so when I name it as embodied knowledge, it's very different to how home understands it. And so I get conflicted talking about it like that. But I think if I was to talk about it in terms of in the paper, it touches on the notion of embodied knowledge. And I think that's what Dave has hit on and Saola did too. So like how you understand something is quite different when you're in the place that gives that thought and that knowledge and that being energy. I'm quite different when I'm at home. I write quite differently when I'm at home to when I'm writing in Wellington. You know, I write with a different feeling, and you know, when you're writing, you'll be writing, you'll get up and you'll go do something to get a break. When I'm at home and I'm writing, it's very different for me because I feel that the place knows me. So I'm writing in a place that knows me and informs my thinking. And so I saw that in the people from home when we would talk about different places and they would want to go and, you know, be there and show me the place. Like this is the place where this happened. This is the site where this happened. And in Māoridom, the common term for it is wahitapu, and that's a modern Māori, like this, the culturally sacred site. People are calling them wahitapu now, so they would want to take me and my sister to the wahitapu, or we knew of them anyways. And so when I'm standing in that place and I'm hearing what people might call the story or the legend or the mythology, it has a different energy to it. It has a different intelligence. It has a different feeling. And when I'm there, there is no way, and this goes for anybody from home, there is no way that you will tell us that what we understand and what we know does not exist. Yeah, it's not even a facet of how we're thinking, because we feel it in our bodies, hence the embodied knowledge. So when I shift away from that, I can hold that feeling for a time, and then as Dave said, it changes. I lose some of the capacity to hold that energy and that intelligence that that place has given me. So I think this is one of the reasons that Penny and Jani have touched upon. When we're heading home, we start feeling that. We start feeling that call and that land, sea, skyscape drawing us back. And I'm guessing for Penny and Jani, when they come off home, they will be a different person. They will be refreshed, regenerated, reinvigorated from that energy that's held in those places. And I can see people nodding heads. You guys know what I mean, right? Like when you're in that place, and it's not just land, sea, skyscape, right? It's the tipuna, it's the ancestors, it's those that are yet to come that all live on that land, sea, skyscape, and playing with all those dynamics in the paper. Just kind of blew it up, and I had to really condense it down to be a paper. But it's playing around all of those things and trying to capture those things that are real. I can't go to my lecture and say, here, hold it in my hand, but there is no way you can tell me that it doesn't exist, and there's no way that you can tell the people at home who want to go to that wahitapu and show me this is the place where all my wahine dived into the ocean and caught, pāwa or whatever kaimoana she was, and then hung her kite here. And so this is why we honour these rocks on this beach. There's just no way you can tell us that that doesn't hold its own significance and its own meaning and regenerate us as a people. And so I think one of the purposes that I try to write this stuff around home is to push back on that fabric of what we know, and to provide this literature and these pockets of literature, so that people can go, well, no, it's there, it's real, it's written, it's there. Because outside of home, it's very difficult to validate and legitimize it. It's just some of the politics around it. I think that might have spoken to what you asked me, Martin.
Well, that's cool. Thank you.
Oh, can I also say, I fully understand that, like, I'm talking to tangata whenua, right? And, in a conceptualization of aroa wahine ancestry, be it people, homeland, whenua, ocean, creature. But in the same way, I fully respect what you, Saola, or Dave, or Tipura or Kabini would offer, because I would see more commonalities in how that knowledge and the generation and the respect for those notions of the natural environment and the natural world being a living being. I fully expect and honor the different ways that you would talk about that type of intelligence, and your own ways of understanding your relationality to the worlds outside of humanity. And I love hearing it. I love hearing how they crisscross and how they feed into each other. And it's just beautiful. And then if I step outside of that thinking, the world is very grey to me. It loses its colour and vibrancy. When I just see, if I think of the world as an inanimate being, if I think of a tree just as something that's in the way and I might chainsaw down, stuff like that. I'm very at home with a community who sees the natural world for what it is, a living being, and something that creates us.
Sure.
Kia ora, Martin, if I could just
Go ahead, Bernie.
say something. Kia ora, thank you, Adreanne, Johnny, Seula, Pine, David. This conversation. So I sort of, what I'm about to say sort of comes in from left field a bit, but it comes from where I've been with my PhD work, which I completed this year, and what I'm hearing is what Pākehā can bring to this, because my research was, or at the heart of it, was about how Pākehā can be in relationship with tangata whenua, and or tangata tiriti be in relationship with tangata whenua, so increasingly, since I've completed, people have been asking me, so what's the answer? And so people are often looking for tick box things, right? And one of the big things, and I was talking with someone just yesterday about, on the weekend, actually, my te reo noho over the weekend, and saying I haven't sort of rushed into putting something out there too much, because, and getting into that sort of conversation, it's like, okay, what next? But at the one of the essential things that I will be encouraging Pākehā Pārangi to do is to actually, by all means, go and do sort of things like learn about history and learn about learn te reo, all of those sort of things. But one of the big things I'm going to encourage people to do is to either find a place that was important to them growing up, right, in their family, and then go and not only find out all about that place. It might have been where they used to go on holiday, it might have been where they grew up, and find everything you can about that place, not only from an historical in books point of view, but also by going and talking to the people who come from there, right? And that will be how you will come into relationship with tangata whenua, and or actually in mana whenua, right? And then you will begin to understand, you will begin to cross over into an understanding of, okay, so that's what can open up in my future, in my future relationship with tangata whenua. And I fully intend to be doing that for myself, on both sides of my families. A couple of generations ago, my families on both sides ended up with land that had been taken various forms and ended up in ballots, and as ballot farms. And the history of some of it is just like, your heart aches when you realise what the people went through. I discovered one of those totally by accident when I happened to be about 20 years ago or more, 25, I think I was with my kids at Te Papa, and and they were running around like mad. They were all this high, and they were and I was standing next to one of the po, and one of those, and they had the oral histories, and someone was speaking, and I realised they were talking about Lake Wairarapa and the bottom of Lake Wairarapa and the land around there, and how it was, and the deal that was done with Māori, and they put mana whenua on buses and took them to the middle of the North Island and put them on land, or said, we're giving you land, and put them on this land which clearly had been taken off Waikato earlier, and basically, you know, left them on this poor land, and it was just like, anyway, I had to rip myself away from that and go and chase after my kids because they were causing havoc, because I'd been sort of stuck to this power going, this is amazing, you know, and this is how my, you know, and my grandparents farmed this land, you know, which a couple of owners ago had been this land, and so my intention is to go and find out more and even write about that even more deeply for Pākehā, you know, for that understanding. I mean, those stories have been told about that land around there, but it's just, it needs to be out there even more. Anyway, so I think for Pākehā have a role to play, and by doing these sort of actions, I believe, I hope we have less of the subdividing, the chopping down of trees, all of those things that come as a result of seeing a land as as something tradable. Yeah.
Cool, thanks, Bernie. I'm aware that some people need to leave. I'm not calling the TokStori to a close. I'm just gonna hand over to Penny just to close off the formal section. Then I think many of us will carry on, although I'm aware that Jani's gone because she needs to lecture, and possibly Adreanne will also have to go. But we'll just pass over to Penny, and then we'll carry on informally should you have time to do that.
Kia ora tātou, me inoi tātou, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou āriki a ihu karaitsi, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitana ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora. Penny, I wondered if you would like to respond, or Adrian, if you've got time, respond to Bernie.
It's pretty deep what Bernie said. I'm just thinking it through. I'm also a bit torn because I've got a lecture on right now that I'm trying to run to. But let me stay for a moment and I can make it up to them when I get up to the lecture hall. I've got donuts that I've brought for them anyway, so I'll make it up with donuts. I
covers many things.
I stopped in at the supermarket at 7 o'clock, grabbed them, and I'll give them to them when I get up to class. First of all, I really want to meet you, Bernie. And I've heard a lot about you from Jani, because I know Jani from the My group. I've known her for years from there. So I really want to meet you. So I'm going to make an effort for us to do that outside of this. I teach papers at uni, some undergrad papers, and one of them is around race and ethnicity, and another one, the stage 3 that's on now, is around political Māori politics, and it covers a lot of stuff at treaty. And both papers together can be confrontational to my students, to my non-Māori students. Not so much to my Māori and Pacifica students, they're like down with it all. But it's very confrontational for my Pākehā students, or let's just say my non-brown students. And so I've thought about what you're saying in terms of, allyship. I'm of the position where I believe that transformation, and we so need transformation, Māori call it decolonisation, but if we call it transformation and emancipation, that won't be achieved by Indigenous people alone. you know, I fully align with allyship in terms of Pākehā becoming aware of the history of their country and doing what they can to contribute to make our society better, in terms of more equitable, in terms of less racist, in terms of, you know, minority groups not being disadvantaged as they are in the ways they are, with the justification and the discourses that justify it. So I fully agree with what you're suggesting in terms of there being an awakening for Pākehā and a sense of picking up the colonial burden that, you know, they can so easily dodge because society doesn't make people take responsibility for the colonial history. So I'd love to talk more with you about it and write on it and do some thinking around it, because I don't think we alone will affect transformation. And so I look forward to, and I look for allies that will do that. Like, you know, I will work with them. I will think alongside them. I do put in the caveat though, we're not looking, one of my thoughts is we're not looking for Pākehā to become brown Māoris. We're looking for Pākehā to be the best Pākehā that they can be, you know, within the way that's defined. And so there's limitations on what they can do in a Māori world, but same way there's limitations on what Māori can do in a Pākehā world. And I think these are some of the tough political dynamics that we have to talk through, and just put on the table for discussion and negotiation. Because a lot of times what happens is we dodge them, and it comes down in my classes where students are just so grateful to have a space to be able to say things, or to hear the term racism used, you know, or to hear some of the difficult terms talked about in a way that acknowledges the reality that we're in, but doesn't blame or victimize or pathologize anyone. I think I've said enough. I've talked so much today, Martin.
That's fine.
My apologies for that, everyone.
No, thank you. And it was interesting. We were in a session I think last week, where people were talking about, from Canada, were talking about decolonization, and it seemed to me that some people's thinking is like it's a place that you're going to arrive at, but to me, it's actually looking at what is the nature of our relationships with each other. In other words, I'm thinking like colonization is a dominant relationship, and reshaping relationships so that there is no basis of dominance. There's a basis, not necessarily of agreement either, but an agreement to try and understand each other. And I think one of the things that the Wellington Southerlies is trying to do is to say we have all these different ways of talking and thinking it right across our vast moana, and what belongs to one group belongs to that group, but at the same time we can learn from each other. And it was so lovely hearing Dave and Sola coming from a Tongan perspective, but having the intersection, and then Bernie's intersection coming through as well, where we are who we are, and I'm sure Bernie, Bernie doesn't want to be brown, and I'm from London, so I'm ashamed of my country at the moment, but you can't change where you're from. But the question isn't who we are, it's who we are together and how we relate to each other. And that's why I think it's interesting looking at your work, the work that it's not just the relationship between people, but the relationship between people and place. And going back to kind of the idea of the Southerlies investigating kind of oralities or oral forms across the moana, the idea that those forms belong to that place, but they operate differently in that place compared to out of the place. And that comes back to a question that we were asked some time ago about what is Talanoa, and does Talanoa change with context? And context is to do, as Dave said, with space and time. So I'm kind of just riffing a bit here, but those are the things that are going on in my head anyway. So yeah, we've still got more time if people would like to chip in.
Can I just say I better go before I get
Sure.
fired?
No.
But I just want to say I've loved the session, and I'm really touched by the different contributions. Sayola, what you said was so touching. You know, and the way you present, it's just so stately. It's got such presence, even on Zoom. So I'm really humble. What are you laughing at, Penny? And Penny, you know, the way you just put words together, as well as, you know, I'm really lucky to have been accepted by Martin and Kabini and Penny and be able to work with them. So I'm going to take off to my class. I just didn't want to leave without saying thank you to everyone for your time, as well as a very uplifting experience. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, and we'll put up the recording so you can see whatever happens after you've gone. So have a good lecture.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Martin, can I make some comments?
Yes, of course you may, Kabini.
Thank you, and I want to link Bernie's view with what has been said prior to that. But I'm really focusing on the concept of the heart, which is in the title of the work. Home is where my heart is settled. I am being myself when I know my heart is content. And in that sense, I am, and I belong when my heart is at peace. And so it's a subjective understanding. It says, and consequently, I think Bernie's point is important. I grew up in a context where tribally, my ancestral empire was actually a maritime empire. And our ancestral gods were in the form of sharks. And so we conquer parts of the Solomons prior, as a result of that. But if I look at the traditional markers of home for me, all those are under sea now. And so in that sense, fiscally, there is no land there anymore where it used to be an atoll or parts of an atoll. They are below the waves now. They are part of the reefs now. But for me, that's not the issue. The fact that the physical manifestation is no longer there, and again linked to Seula's point about Tuvalu. It's not so much that the physical is the privileging. The essence of the matter, the essence of being and belonging is a matter of the heart. And so I suppose for me, how do we use that understanding where things that matter most are really matters of the heart? And how do we then take that understanding to live in our world and negotiate the tensions that we face in our world? If Adreanne was around, I'd probably ask her a question. What are the tensions for iwi members who are not at the peninsula and who may be living in Auckland and were born in Auckland and who have been in Auckland for years or in Wellington. And consequently, how do you use the heart as a way of explaining the degree of membership voice or degree of membership authority or legitimacy in when you're facing tensions like that. So I think there's good insight in framing this kinds of issues as matters of the heart. And I think the possibility for negotiating the tensions we are dealing with in our time will have to come from that particular way of understanding, unless we are using the heart as the promise for negotiating the tensions which are multiple and we can talk about. We are not likely to stay with the important understanding of being at home, even in a world which is much more complex now. Thank you, Martin.
Kia ora, Wontok, thank you.
I just make a comment, Kabini and Martin, before I have to zoom out. It's about thinking about resilience in these times, and as educators, what kind of education systems or what kind of curriculum or what kind of learning, whether it's formal, informal, or non-formal, how do we prepare our children that they may be able to survive in a world that is going to be different from where we are? And I'm encouraged when we look across disciplines and across perspectives to try and find some kind of direction on where to go forward. In thinking about resilience, there was a conference I attended about a year ago, and Lisita's just kind of ducked out a bit. But in that conference was asking about resilience. And in that conference, I explored what does resilience mean for a Tongan and a Tongan child who is most likely to live outside of Tonga, who's most likely to leave these islands and find a life for themselves, either in Sydney or Los Angeles or Auckland. What is the one thing that I would like my children to take with them? And in this conference, we discussed about lotu, faith, and believing in a God that'll take them through the trials. So spirituality, lotu, and our second part to thinking about resilience is your kaina or your iwi. And so today I'm reminded of that, of what makes us resilient. It's not about the goods that we have or how much money we have in the bank. It's probably about the iwi, about the kaina and your faith, and that spiritual connection to a higher being. So again, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for sharing the research from Aotearoa. In some ways, it affirmed our own thinking about resilience and thinking about the future. Mahalo Pito for the opportunity.
Malo Pito, Sarila.
I wonder if I might say something just before we close, and that's to thank all the speakers so much for this morning, and how touched I have been. I've been listening and reflecting a lot, and this is just a personal thing to say that when I reflect on my own upbringing, and I know very little about my family, if I'm honest. I think that we've lived in transient places, and that you know, when my parents died, I think a lot of their stories went with them, and so when I listen to the connection to place and to your te puna, and the understanding that helps you as individuals to feel strong, and I realise there's a lot of soul since I completed my PhD, which end of 2019. I think I've probably spent that time since then doing a lot of personal reflection, and actually a lot of personal writing, just to try and actually work out later in life who I am. And what has made sense to me this morning, probably a lot of what I tried to understand myself has come from the lack of knowledge and the lack of place that that sits within me. And so yeah, there's been a very rich learning for me today, and maybe as Kabini said, that it's matters of the heart, which are things that I perhaps need to learn, which maybe I need to enable my children to learn, so that they may let their children learn. And these are things that are for me to do, and others like myself to do, which we can gain when we spend time with in communities such as this. Yeah, that can enrich us. I think that's all I wish to say, really. But anyway, just to show that I have really really learned so much this morning. Thank you.
Kia ora making. Ngā mihi.
Martin, I have a methodological question for Adrianne. And again, so that she can hear the question. She will want to listen to the recording after she left. Yeah, so that, yeah, because the research was set out to really capture an iwi community's framing of itself as a community, and therefore what they understood as home. But I noticed methodologically, she went out and did a whole lot of interviews.
Yeah.
So I was just interested in whether for this particular iwi, there would have been other appropriate ways of going about finding what iwi belongingness would look like authentically. Yeah, so I was interested in whether having a group of interviews was probably okay in producing what has been produced, or whether if they stayed with an indigenous knowledge system, whether that would have lent itself to a different way of doing the how. Anyway, that's the question.
Yeah, sorry, Kabini, carry on.
No, I was just saying, and whether if that was explored, it would have produced something else, or it would have produced something else that's colorful or colored differently from what has been painted. Thank you.
Yeah, and that interested me in the sense that I wondered how the word interview was being understood in that place. And that also sat partly behind my question of, well, if you go from wherever it was you were doing the interview, let's call it that for now, and you went to the Wahi Tapu, how did that change how did that change the form of the conversation, the form of the dialogue from with a research hat on from a methodological point of view, but just from a person hat on, like how does that transform things? So Adreanne, when you listen, we'd be interested to know what you have to say about that. Yeah. Okay, it's the last call for anybody else who'd like to chip in. I see that Patricia is down there hiding Matthew. Nice to see you, Matthew. Well, nice to see Patricia anyway.
Deborah has a comment.
Yeah, good.
Thank you for today, for today's session. And thank you, Martin, for saying last call to encourage people who haven't spoken. I've been listening. The words that we say in Samoa is whaalongolongo te toa, which is listening very mindfully and deeply and reflecting on what has been said. And I remember a story when I first arrived here at University of Waikato. And there's a marae, Te Kohinga Marama, that's the name of the marae, right next to the Faculty of Education, actually. And so to get to my office from where I park, I walk across or around the marae. And you know, I grew up in Samoa where you go into the village, and there are marae spaces or malai spaces, and you don't walk across the green. You know, with all the meeting houses situated around the green malai, because of, you know, the sacredness of the place, and you're not quite sure. If you're new to a village, you always walk around the malai because you don't want to offend anyone intentionally. And so for a whole year, every time I walk to my office, I walk around the marae, even though it looks really weird if someone was watching me walk from my car to the Faculty of Education. And I always felt out of place at the University of Waikato, not you know, in the sense of academia, but in the sense of space and place. And I just was never sure, you know, how I could deal with it until last year, when I think it was after David Favai joined the faculty. And I don't know how he managed it, but there was a proper pōwhiri for new staff at the Faculty of Education, including him and some other staff. And somehow I was in the group that was going to be welcomed again, even though I'd been at the university for 2 or 3 years. So the long story short is that there was a pōwhiri at the marae, and a proper welcoming and acknowledgement took place. You know, words were said on both sides. And I have to say, it was not until that happened that I felt that I had entered into the space and place of where I was at the University of Waikato, in terms of the land and the energy of the land, the mana whenua. And it wasn't until then that I felt that the va had been established or entered into, you know, that relational place. And I brought up that story because a lot of the things that we were talking about just then, it resonated, this whole conversation, because as someone coming from outside the place into a place, I feel that it's so important to acknowledge place in whatever way that we do it. And so when I think of my children, leading on from the question that Seula had posed a few minutes ago, how do we teach our children to acknowledge place so that they feel grounded in the new spaces that they go into, and the new spaces that they will continue to find in their futures, really? because I felt that that acknowledgement of place it gave me the words that Kabini said just then, more comfort. Now, it feels weird, but it wasn't until then that I could now literally go all over Hamilton, all over the university without feeling like I hadn't done something that had been done. Anyway, that's just my story for today. Thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you, Te Poro. Yeah, it reminds me of this is a weird thing for me to talk about, but in Melbourne, my son's in Melbourne. In Melbourne, I have a profound sense of discomfort sometimes of the status of the land. And I was out for a run one day around St Kilda, and I came across a tree, and the tree's got a plaque by it. And that tree was a place where the local tangata whenua would come into the city and they'd meet there. And although when Adreanne talks about like the feelings of those things, of the place, I don't have that. But the significance of those feelings, I can recognize that. And it seemed to me that like we always try and go back to the tree, and we just sit by the tree, Sylvia, my wife and I, just for a few minutes. In a way, there's not protocol attached to that I would know or understand, but it's our protocol to recognize that this land is the land it is, rather than just, you know, some other part of some other country, if that makes any sense at all. And it doesn't change the status of the land or the sadness that's associated with the things that have happened, but I guess it's just our gesture to acknowledge all those things done in that way, which is kind of it's not the same as what you've been talking about, but I think my heart and your heart is saying the same thing about it, to go back to the heart. Yeah, that's a story I haven't told anybody else before. So there you go. All right, so I think that's probably our time. I'm really grateful to everybody turning up. It's been a very different Wellington Southerlies, but a very deep one. And we'll put up the recording, and I will sit and watch it and listen to it again, because there's been a lot of things said that I can hear the words, but I want to be able to understand the song, if you know what I mean. So there's a lot more learning on to be done. And I thank you all for coming. I thank Penny for managing our protocols and for blessing us with her words. And to our speakers, the two that have gone, we're very grateful for their time. And Serulo, as usual, thank you for gracing us with your presence. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you have a safe day, and that the coconuts are there for you to eat and drink and not fall on your head. Unless anybody has any last final comments, I'd say thank you once again. And tēnā te mihi kia koutou, te mihi ki te tangata whenua, te mihi ki ngā tangata o te moana nui a kiwa, and ngā tangata o ngā hawe whā, which in this place includes me.